Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, January 14th, 2026. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Trump tells Iran protesters that help is on its way. So President Trump on Tuesday called for the protests in Iran to continue and said that help is on its way in his latest threat of military intervention in Iran. He also said in this post that he cut off discussions, cut off communication with Iranian officials. So I'll read his full post here. And this is just extremely provocative and certainly does not dispel the notion that the protests are backed by foreign powers. So Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "Iranian patriots, keep protesting. Take over your institutions. Save the names of the killers and abusers. They will pay a big price. I have canceled all meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. Help is on its way. MIGA," end quote. And of course, when he says MIGA there, he means make Iran great again. Although some have theorized that he might be saying make Israel great again, because that is the only reason why he's threatening military intervention in Iran, because it's something Israel wants. It certainly does not benefit the U.S. in any way. But anyway, so Trump used this slogan, make Iran great again, during the 12-day war, when he suggested in a post on Truth Social that he might pursue regime change in Iran. So again, very provocative here. And then all day he doubled down on this threat. He gave some address on Tuesday, and he basically said the Truth Social post verbatim. And there was a meeting at the White House on Tuesday night to discuss U.S. military options for attacking Iran. So these seem to be very much real threats. And you know, there's questions like we haven't seen deployments of U.S. aircraft carriers in the region. And look, there's been just so many reports about so many claims about what's happening inside Iran, claims about what the U.S. is going to do, claims about what Iran is telling regional countries, just all sorts of stuff flying around. And it's really hard to get a grasp on what's real. It's really hard to read what Trump is actually going to do. I think there's an enormous amount of psyops happening here. Obviously there's a big push for war here, and this is something that Israel really wants is for the U.S. to back a new war with Iran. And when it comes to the protests, the government sources were saying that things have winded down, although they have maintained the shutdown of the internet. And there's reports that they've also figured out a way to jam the Starlink that has been sent into the country. But then we see on X all people claiming that the things are still underway, but a lot of people are posting videos from a few days ago. So again, it's tough to really know what's happening, and the numbers are all over the place. I have no idea what the numbers are of people who were killed. The only thing that I've seen corroborated from both Iranian government sources and the U.S.-funded NGOs that are putting out numbers is that more than 100 Iranian, I mentioned this yesterday, security officers, law enforcement, and military have been killed, which does suggest there's been armed attacks against Iranian security forces. That's a significant number. And then, I saw today there was this claim that 12,000 people were killed in Iran, and this originated from a media outlet called Iran International, which is not a credible source when it comes to news about Iran. As I understand its history, it started as a Saudi-funded outlet when the Saudis were much more antagonistic toward Iran. And I remember back in, I think it was 2022, Barak Ravid, who's a reporter for Axios, former Israeli intelligence officer, said that the Mossad uses that media outlet as part of its information war. And so they're the first ones to throw out this 12,000 number, and then it just goes everywhere. And also CBS News had a report claiming a similar number, citing one source, or they said two sources, including one source in Iran. Does not seem like a very well-sourced report at all. And of course, CBS News was recently taken over by Barry Weiss, who of course is very pro-Israel, and I'm sure she wants war with Iran. So, again, just kind of a lot of psychological operations happening here. But anyway, so you had Trump make these threats, and there was some kind of meeting Tuesday night, and we see reports saying that a decision has been made for strikes. But other reports say it's unlikely, so who knows what's going to happen? I have no idea. I'm really hoping that this does not turn into another war, and I think we have every reason to believe that if the U.S. does bomb Iran, that Iran is going to hit back hard, and we'll get more into that in the next story. But just in response to this post from Trump, Ali Larijani, who's the secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, in response to Trump's post, he said that the names of the main killers of the people of Iran were Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps also claimed that they disrupted an Israeli-linked, what they called a terror team, and claimed that they seized U.S.-made weapons. And Iranian officials have warned that the U.S. would face a severe response to any attack. So the next one here, U.S. opens air defense cell in Qatar amid threats to bomb Iran. So U.S. Central Command on Tuesday announced the opening of a new air defense coordination cell at its Al Udeid air base in Qatar, which Iran attacked back in June in response to U.S. airstrikes on its nuclear facilities. So they said that this new Middle Eastern air defense, what they call the Combined Defense Operations Cell, will be comprised of personnel from the U.S. and regional partners. And so this is kind of interesting that they announced this amid all these tensions and threats for the U.S. to bomb Iran, because this is, again, this is the base that Iran attacked in response to the U.S. bombing its nuclear facilities. And so just a reminder of what went down back in June 2025. Israel launched the war by conducting major airstrikes and attacks, including attacks on the ground using their intel operatives, assets in Iran, airstrikes, all sorts of sabotage as well. And then after a few days of heavy Israeli airstrikes, then the U.S. bombed the nuclear facilities. And in response to the U.S. bombing the nuclear facilities, Iran fired missiles at the Al Udeid air base in Qatar. But they gave the U.S. notice. They gave the U.S. time to evacuate and prepare missile defenses for the attack. And even with that, at least one missile got through and destroyed a communication dome at the base, and that's something that's been acknowledged by the Pentagon. And to repel this attack, this Iranian missile attack, which has really been downplayed by Trump, according to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, it involved the largest single Patriot engagement in U.S. military history. So that means they used the Patriot missiles, and it was the largest engagement, use of them by the U.S. military in history. So even this attack that, they had all this warning, it wasn't, it took a substantial response to ensure that there wasn't, that they intercepted most of the missiles and one still got through. So imagine if Iran launches an attack like that without any warning, and now imagine that they do it against several U.S. bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, maybe Syria. There's a lot of possibilities, a lot of potential targets. But Trump is saying, he's brushed this off. He was asked about the warnings from Iranian officials that if you bomb us, we're going to hit your bases. This is what Trump said. He said, quote, Iran said that the last time I blew them up with the nuclear capability, which they don't have any longer. So Iran said that the last time, they better behave, end quote. So essentially what Trump is saying is, they made all these threats that they would hit us hard the last time, and then it was nothing. So from the perspective of the Iranians, of the Iranian government, it's clear, if the U.S. bombs them again, then they did not establish deterrence with their missile attack on that base. So that gives them a reason to expand it. And of course, if they expand it and there's U.S. casualties, well, that's probably just going to get the U.S. more involved. So this could lead to a real disaster. And Trump right now is really kind of riding high after his Venezuela attack. He didn't face any real consequences for that. yet. We don't know how that's all going to play out. It was a barbaric attack that killed 80 to 100 people, but no Americans were killed, and so it hasn't hurt Trump yet politically. As far as we don't know. According to the polls, Americans didn't support it. But a real disastrous military intervention could really hurt Trump. And that's the least of our concerns when it comes to something like this. I'm just saying from his perspective, but this could really turn into a disaster here in the region. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. may fund an Israeli armored vehicle factory, so more U.S. military aid for Israel. So the U.S. may spend up to $2 billion financing the construction of a new armored production plant in Israel, Haaretz reported on Monday, citing official U.S. documents. The report said that the Israeli government announced last year a project that it calls the Armored Vehicle Acceleration Project to increase production of Merkava tanks and troop carriers used by the IDF. The Israeli Defense Ministry estimated the project would cost about $1.5 billion, but it did not mention potential U.S. financing. According to documents from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a presentation from October lists future business opportunities in Israel, including the planning, design, and construction of what they call a joint systems manufacturing center for Israeli armored vehicles, and that presentation stated that the project is expected to cost between $1 billion and $2 billion and will be financed by U.S. military aid. Another document from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers dated November also outlines opportunities for the Army Corps of Engineers, and they include this, again, what they call a joint systems manufacturing center. The Haaretz report said that when asked about the projects, the U.S. Army said that a final decision has not been made. So this isn't all locked in, but it looks like it's likely that the U.S. will fund this. And the U.S., of course, provides Israel with at least $3.8 billion in military aid each year. And they've given them more to support the genocidal campaign in Gaza and all the other wars in the region, in Yemen and Iran, Syria, Lebanon. So this is, will probably come from what has already been authorized if the U.S. does end up funding this project. All right, so the next one here, Knesset's Palestinian death penalty bill mandates execution by hanging. So this article's from The Cradle. So Israeli lawmakers are advancing a bill that would introduce executions by hanging for Palestinians convicted under military law, according to a report by Haaretz published on January 13th. The report detailed the proposal and internal objections following its approval in a first Knesset reading in November. The legislation, formerly titled the Death Penalty for Terrorists Bill, was initiated by Israeli lawmaker Limar San Har Melech of the Atzma Yehudit Party, or translated to English, the Jewish Power Party, and approved by a vote of 39 to 16. And that's Itamar Ben-Gvir's party, the national security minister, who is really the driving force behind this death penalty bill. And under this proposal, executions would be carried out by hanging and completed within 90 days of a final ruling following a judge-signed order and under the supervision of the Israel Prison Service. So one reason why I wanted to run this in the top section is because on Tuesday, Trump was asked by some reporter, there's rumors that Iran's going to start hanging protesters. What are you going to do if they start hanging people? And Trump says, I'm going to hit them hard if they start hanging people. And then yet here we have the Israeli Knesset advancing a bill to hang Palestinians. And of course, this is one thing that's just so phony about all this concern that we see from Trump, from his backers and all the Israel firsters and Israel supporters in the U.S. All of a sudden, they're humanitarians after what we've seen them support for the past 2 years. And of course, just in general, not even just with Israel, but the hypocrisy of the U.S. government. Think about all the governments it supports in the Middle East, the Gulf monarchs. Saudi Arabia is known for executing, beheading protesters. And of course, they just helped put the leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria in power. And they've been committing horrific massacres against Alawites and Druze and some Kurds now lately. And that just gets ignored. because that is someone who the U.S. wants in power, and the media, has really pushed that for many years, so they don't put a spotlight on those massacres. But anyway, you guys all know this stuff. All right, so the next one here, Israeli tank fires on Spanish peacekeepers in southern Lebanon. So this is from Jason Ditz. Just 2 weeks after Israeli troops fired on an injured UNIFIL peacekeeper in southern Lebanon, yet another incident is being reported with an Israeli tank firing multiple shells at a group of UNIFIL peacekeepers from Spain in the area around Qiam, which is one of the villages in the south. 3 shots were fired in the incident, which took place on Monday, and the shells landed within 150 meters of the peacekeepers. And the UN is warning that these incidents are increasing. And there's been nobody's been wounded in the attacks, but there's concern because it involved Israeli Merkava tanks pushing further they crossed the border into Lebanon and pushed pretty far in. And you can see this picture here. These are the UN peacekeeping forces. They're armored vehicles in southern Lebanon. They're painted white. They're very bright. They have the letters UN in big black letters on the side, very clearly marked, yet we keep seeing Israel fire near them, drop grenades near them, and they claim, we didn't mean to do it. But I mean, I don't know how you can miss them. They're just, again, driving around bright white vehicles. All right, so the next one here, UNICEF says that the IDF has killed 100 children in Gaza since the so-called ceasefire. So a spokesman for the UN's Child Relief Agency, UNICEF, said on Tuesday that Israeli forces have killed at least 100 children in Gaza since the start of the U.S.-backed ceasefire, which the IDF has constantly violated. UNICEF spokesman James Elder said, quote, more than 100 children have been killed in Gaza since the ceasefire of early October. That is roughly one girl or boy killed every day during a ceasefire. UNICEF has recorded reports of at least 60 boys and 40 girls killed in the Gaza Strip. The 100 figure only reflects incidents where sufficient details have been available to record, so the actual number of Palestinian children killed is expected to be higher. Hundreds of children have been wounded, end quote. He said that children have been killed by airstrikes, drone strikes, including suicide drones, tank shelling, live ammunition, and remote control quadcopters. Gaza's health ministry said on Tuesday that since the ceasefire was supposed to go into effect on October 10th, the IDF has killed at least 447 Palestinians and wounded 1,246, so 1,600 about total casualties. And the ministry said that a total of 5 Palestinians were killed over the previous 24 hours. An elder pointed out that other children have died due to the cold weather as families living in flimsy tents and the rubble of bombed-out buildings amid continued Israeli restrictions. And he also said that the humanitarian situation in Gaza has improved somewhat, but that there's continued Israeli restrictions on aid, and they've halted medical evacuations, and he called for the ceasefire to be enforced and for the full lifting of the Israeli blockade. All right, so the next one here, at least 5 die in Gaza, collapsed buildings, and more deaths from the cold. So this article is from Al Jazeera. So at least 5 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza as a fierce winter storm toppled buildings damaged by Israeli attacks in its genocidal war on the territory, local health officials said. Dangerous living conditions persist in Gaza after more than 2 years of devastating Israeli bombardment and aid shortfalls. The people who died in Tuesday's stormy conditions include 2 women, a girl, and a man, according to the Al-Shifa hospital. There were reports of several other deaths of children and the elderly due to cold weather. The Gaza Health Ministry said on Tuesday that a 1-year-old boy died of hypothermia overnight. So the nightmare, the hell that Israel created in Gaza continues. All right, so the next one here, Senate to vote on Venezuela war powers bill. So the Senate is expected to hold a final vote on a war powers resolution aimed at preventing further U.S. military intervention in Venezuela on Wednesday, according to a report from Fox News, as President Trump continues to lash out at Democrats who voted to advance the bill. So the bill, SJ Res 98, so that's the name where you could go look it up and call your senator and tell them to support it. So this bill would direct the president to terminate the use of U.S. armed forces for hostilities within or against Venezuela unless a declaration of war or authorization to use military force for such purposes has been enacted. Last week, the Senate held a procedural vote to bring the bill out of committee, which passed 52 to 47, and 5 Republicans, Senators Rand Paul, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Todd Young, and Josh Hawley, joined Democrats in supporting the legislation. And after the vote, President Trump took to Truth Social to attack the Republicans, saying that they should never be elected to office again. And on Tuesday, the president again targeted the 5 senators in remarks that he delivered at the Detroit Economic Club, where he gave a little speech on Tuesday. So this is what he said, referring to those senators, quote, "You say, why are you voting against? They can't give you an answer. They're unable to give you an answer. It's like, why are they against the attack on Venezuela? They're against the attack after they found out. It was the most successful attack, probably," end quote. One thing I should have mentioned in the article, but before the last vote on the War Powers Resolution, I think both in the House and the Senate, not the vote last week, it was before the U.S. attack on Venezuela, the Trump administration told Congress that they did not have plans to attack Venezuela. So they just lied to them. But anyway, so Trump says that they didn't explain their reasoning, that they couldn't explain it, but that's not true. They all put out statements explaining it. Hawley said that basically all of them said, referenced Trump threatening to attack Venezuela again and suggesting that he could send troops there as the reason, saying if there's further military intervention, it needs Congress's authorization. And that's what Collins, Young, and Hawley all basically said. And then Paul and Murkowski have been consistent. They voted for the first War Powers resolution. But anyway, so we'll see what happens with this vote. We'll see if Trump is able to pressure any of these Republicans from flipping. So that is expected to happen on Wednesday. And again, call your senator, tell him to support it. The next one here, new start to expire in less than a month. So this is concerning news here. The last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the U.S. and Russia, the New START, is set to expire on February 5th, which will leave the world's largest nuclear powers with no limits on the deployment of their nuclear weapons. So the New START caps the number of nuclear warheads either side can deploy at 1,550, and also limits the deployment of delivery systems. In 2023, Russia said that it was suspending participation in New START, citing U.S. support for Ukrainian attacks on Russian facilities housing nuclear weapons, but both Washington and Moscow said that they would continue to abide by the limits set by the treaty, so the treaty has still essentially been in force. Putin has offered the U.S. a 1-year extension of the New START limits to give time for diplomacy to negotiate a replacement treaty, but according to Russian officials, the U.S. has not formally responded to the proposal. In an interview with the New York Times last week, President Trump appeared unbothered by the impending deadline. This is what Trump said, quote, "If it expires, it expires. We'll do a better agreement," end quote. And he also told the paper that any extension should include China, but Beijing has a significantly smaller nuclear stockpile than the U.S. and Russia. So this all sounds familiar. During the first Trump administration, the U.S. pulled out of 2 key arms control treaties with Russia in the first Trump administration. The INF Treaty, which prohibited the development of short and medium range ballistic missiles, land-based ballistic missiles, and they pulled out of it and started developing them, and now they've been deployed to Asia, and the U.S. is planning to deploy some. They've deployed them to Europe for military drills, but looks like the U.S. is planning a more permanent deployment in Germany. And also they pulled out of Open Skies, which was a mutual surveillance treaty. And so it looked like that first Trump administration was ready to let New START expire. The first expiration date of the treaty was February 5th, 2021. And the U.S. was kind of putting on this little show. I remember it was like around when I first started working full-time for antiwar.com, so I was following it pretty closely. But Trump had this arms control envoy, a guy named Marshall Billingsley, and he said, oh, we're going to negotiate a replacement to New START, but China has to be involved. That's the only way it's going to happen. And this was China's response. They said, we don't want to do a trilateral arms control treaty with the U.S. and Russia unless the U.S. and Russia significantly reduce the number of nuclear warheads that they have, because China's nuclear stockpile is way lower. And Russia also said to the U.S., we can't make China join this, because that's what the U.S. was trying to say to Russia. So anyway, they set up a meeting, I think maybe in Geneva or something, and the U.S. put on this little show. Like they set up chairs with Chinese flags, and then Billingsley posted a picture of the empty chairs, like, oh, China didn't show up, so we can't negotiate with Russia on a replacement. So it looked like that first Trump administration wanted this treaty to expire. And it seems like this Trump administration does as well. There's no built-in extension to the treaty after the first 5-year extension. But what Putin offered basically was to continue to abide by the limits for another year. This is very concerning. This could lead to another, a major nuclear arms race between the U.S. and Russia. Just all signs are pointing in a very dangerous direction on the global stage here. You have Trump with the $1.5 trillion military budget he says that he wants, threatening military intervention all over the place. Arms control treaties completely falling apart. Just not good, and not really getting any attention. Responsible Statecraft had a good story about it, but just virtually no attention anywhere else that I've seen. Of course, the arms control people, Arms Control Today, they're warning about it, but just in general, it's not really something that's being discussed. All right, so the next one here, the UK is developing a long-range missile for Ukraine. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So the UK is attempting to build a new tactical missile for Ukraine that will have a range of over 300 miles. The initiative, dubbed Project Nightfall, aims to develop a ground-launched tactical ballistic missile with a range of 310 miles and a 450-pound warhead. If that metric is met, it will be one of the longest-range weapons the West has provided to Ukraine. So another escalation here, potentially, of Western military support for Ukraine, weapons that could be used for missile strikes deep inside Russia. This is another thing that the risk of escalation in Ukraine and support for attacks inside of Russia that is just barely being talked about. And every sign, unfortunately, with this war is that it's going to continue unless some sort of miracle happens here. But I really don't see anything like that happening. Sorry that my view on most of these conflicts and everything is pretty pessimistic, but it's just the reality of what we're dealing with here. The next one here, new clashes erupt between Syrian troops and Kurdish SDF. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So after a week of heavy fighting between the Syrian military and Kurdish SDF in Deir Hafir and the city of Aleppo, a U.S. brokered ceasefire was reached. 2 days later, fighting has erupted yet again, once again in Deir Hafir and areas east of there. So the Syrian military attacked SDF positions, and army-backed groups attacked a Kurdish village in the area. We've seen some reports. I've seen some reports of, I don't know if there's been like executions of Kurds like we've seen of other minorities. Again, the Kurds are well armed, but I've seen some desecration of Kurds that have been killed. There was a video of Syrian troops pushing the body of a Kurdish fighter, a woman, out of a building from like the third story or something. And these are two U.S.-backed forces now fighting against each other in Syria, which seems to be a common theme in the country. The Kurds, the SDF, who the U.S. has backed for many years, and now the new Syrian government, which is led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the al-Qaeda offshoot that took power in December of 2024. So the fighting continues there. But that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from John Reynolds, A Century of American Imperialism Culminating in Venezuela. One from David Stockman, Trump's Icebox, Has the President Gone Mad? One from Jonathan Cook, Genocide is Not a Mistake, which is why the media can't tell you the truth about Gaza. One from Brett Hines, War Porn Beats Out Venezuela Peace Message in D.C. Metro. And our spotlight from James Antle III, One Big Downside of Trump's Military Successes. So please go check all of that out. Lots of stuff in the lower part of the page and over in the blog. But that's it for us for today. Please support this show, like, subscribe, comment. Just one more, I've been talking about this a lot, but what do we have today? So 2 more shows this week, and then we got a baby coming. Our 3rd child is on the way, and I'll be taking about 2 weeks off of work. So next week, there might be a show. I might do like a show here and there while I'm off to catch up. I mean, again, as I said in the beginning, it's tough to really know what's happening, but I think there's a good chance that Trump bombs Iran within the next few days, within the next couple weeks. I think, if we're to take him at his word, it could happen at any moment. Man, I really am going to be even more angry if he does it while I am off to welcome a new baby child into this world, into our family. But we'll see what happens. Anyway, I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.